All right. I think we're live now.
All righty. I'm ready.
All right. 3, 2, and 1. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool.
Sean. We have got a fascinating interview today. The title of this is Persuasion, Cognitive Bias, Fake News, and the Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions. Is that intriguing?
Seems like a light topic. Sure. Let's
We're
dive
just
in.
Skim the surface.
Dive into all that on a Friday afternoon. Yeah. Luckily, I brought a very strong beverage today, so we should be able to get through it. And we got a guest too. That's exciting. That will help navigate these murky waters.
Absolutely. We have Dr. Howard Rankin. He is the author of a fascinating book. I've not gone through it completely, but I have skimmed the book. And the title is, I Think, Therefore I Am Wrong. A Guide to Bias, Political Correctness, Fake News, and the Future of Mankind. Couldn't think of a more appropriate topic.
Oh, I thought it was a marriage book we were talking about here.
It could be. You might be able to apply that. I've looked at some of the chapters. You could definitely pull those for.
Yeah, we could probably suggest here to the author, Howard Rankin. You could do a whole series of these books.
Yes.
I think therefore I'm wrong, sports fans. I think therefore I'm wrong, husbands.
That's right.
Do a whole series.
Absolutely. I know. You could chicken soup that baby for quite a ways. I love it.
Absolutely.
But before we get into the interview, because he's waiting in the green room, we are going to introduce a couple of our beverages on today. I've got a good one, Sean, I believe. And I don't know about you, man, but I'm excited about mine.
Excited, huh? All right. Hopefully it's better than last week when you were excited.
I think it will be.
All right. I'll let you go first since you got so much excitement coming through. I'm going to grab a snack because I haven't eaten today.
Okay.
Mine's up in the double-digit range, I think. So.
All right. Well, I have one from Oscar Blues Brewery. This is a 2021 barrel-aged series. It is the BA21. I'm going to hold this up here. BA21. It says volume 6. So this
must be quite the naming convention there.
The
BA21 volume 6.
Volume 6.
Makes me just want to run out and drink it.
So it says this is the next up in our series of gigantic barrel aged beers with premium added ingredients. For this installment, I love that. Our brewers worked alongside Corvus Coffee Roasters in Denver to hand select a custom coffee blend featuring 3 distinct roasts to supercharge this bourbon barrel aged imperial stout. To enhance the chocolate and vanilla notes we found in the coffee blend, we went all in, adding vanilla beans. This bad boy is a 13.5%. No, I'm sorry, 13.3. Close enough.
That is pretty strong today. Guess I'll be leading the interview at least the second half.
Absolutely.
Or maybe you will. I don't know. Could go either way.
It could. All right.
So I've got another Untitled Art, which is
like those Untitled Art lately, right?
Well, they just came out with a whole bunch for fall with all their stout flavors. So yeah, I'm.
Oh, look! They even throw the price on the back there.
Well, this is just because I got the singles because it was too cheap to get the 4-pack.
Yeah.
So it saves me a little bit of money to get the singles in case I don't like them.
Bold font, $4.99.
So this is called the Trail Mix Stout.
Okay.
All right. So
that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I know, right?
You like trail mix I do. Outdoorsy guy, you know?
Yeah, so it says stout brewed with cocoa nibs, cocoa flakes, apricot puree, peanut butter powder, and milk something. Can't read the last one. Brewed and canned by Untitled Art out of Wanakoo, Wisconsin, or Wanuki, Wisconsin. I don't know, somewhere
close enough.
So you should be able to find this, I would think, near you. I think I said that last week.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so it is a 10, where was it? 10% ish. Oh, 10.0 on the dot. 10.0.
10.0. Okay.
Yeah. So trail
So
mix
we are
stout. We'll
both in
see.
the double digits.
Yes. Good luck, Howard.
I
No
told
doubt.
him up here. And this one is very dark. Much ahead.
You see mine? Nope.
Yep.
There it is.
Oh, they look pretty similar there.
They do.
Mine's a little bit, head's a little bit darker there. All right. Here we go. Cheers.
Definitely taste the peanut butter in mine,
Mm-hmm.
which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I do not taste the apricot. So I was a little worried about that one. So I don't really, maybe a little hint of it, but
that would have me worried too. Apricot.
Yeah. But no, it's this is good. I've been pretty pleased with this whole series from Untitled Art. So I'm gonna give this a 3.75. No, excuse me, 4.75. Forgot her scale there for a minute. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
No, these are good. I mean, they're again, it's not the all day drinking beer. It's the definitely more towards the dessert beer category. So I'll give it a 4.75 though.
You know, I'm gonna one up you. I'm gonna go 4.85.
All righty. All right. So
magnificent.
Matter, so let's move on with the show.
That's all that matters. I love chocolate. You can't beat chocolate. Coffee, can't beat coffee. Yeah. And beer. You know, that's all you got to say right there.
All good. All righty.
All right. With that said, we've got Sean with the scrolling, the ticker going down below us. We have a fantastic guest. I am pleased to have him. He's been waiting patiently in the green room. Again, he is the author of the book, I Think, Therefore I Am Wrong, a guide to bias, political correctness, fake news, and the future of mankind. We're gonna solve a lot of problems.
A big title, man. I love it. That last phrase, "future of mankind," just puts it all in perspective.
Yeah.
Howard, welcome to the show.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much. I hope I get a good rating as you gave me the beers. That was really good. And I have to say, these weren't the beers that I went to college with. What's chocolate? Apricot? What the heck? Man.
We are craft connoisseurs, Howard. Come on now. We don't drink Miller Lite.
Well, no,
we used to.
I understand that. So already I've learned a lot. I mean, amazing. Yeah. Really.
We couldn't afford these beers in college.
No.
So that tells you something.
They sound good. So I'll have to try some.
Yeah, still have to hide the receipts for my wife. So
yes. You probably saw the single can that Sean was holding up with the price tag. I mean, that costs more than a lot of 6-packs out there. So
that's true.
We can only do this once a week, and there's a reason.
Yeah, my default is always, well, that's less than a single glass if we got to dinner. All right. So that's my default argument, which is
there you go. Justification, rationalization. That's what my book is about.
Exactly.
That's right. We're going to learn a lot of this today. So thank you for coming on. I tell you, before we get in, I want you to give us a little background. You have quite the bio. You've authored a couple of books, maybe more. I may be shortchanging you there, but give us a little history before we get into the topic of your book.
So if you can detect a little bit of an accent, I come from...
not at all.
Not at all? Oh, well, I better step it up a bit then. I come from London originally. Did all my training, education there. I don't know whether you guys are sports guys, but actually I grew up right near the big soccer stadium, Wembley Stadium. Ooh, which was really cool as a young kid who was interested in that. Did my education, went to the University of Nottingham. Actually had been an exchange student in California in high school before I went there. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun too. Went to the University of Nottingham and blah 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 blah. Went in, got my master's and PhD, and appropriately enough, for a show that is centered around beer. First 10 years of my career were spent in the addictions field. Yep, my PhD was all about addiction and new beers that were coming on the market, that would come on the market, and the possibility of including chocolate and apricots in beer in the future. Then I was recruited to South Carolina. A colleague of mine who was also in the addiction field in the U.S. had come to a place called Hilton Head Island, just off the coast of South Carolina, and decided rather smartly that it would be a great place to set up sort of a wellness retreat program. And this was one of the first. And once he got it going, he invited me to come over and run it and do that. And that was a lot of fun. Did that for about 10 years. And then, decided to branch out into other things. I've had a clinical practice. I've done a lot of consulting, done a lot of speaking, and in the last few years have really been focused on writing books. I've now written 12 in my own name.
Wow. Okay.
Co-written 10, and I've ghostwritten about another 30. All of them in this field. It's a lot of fun. Meet some amazing people. Work with them. So it's been a fantastic experience. And along the way, towards the end of sort of my clinical career, I really got interested in cognitive neuroscience. How do we really think? And around that time, Daniel Kahneman came out with Thinking Fast and Slow. And then there was this sort of avalanche of books on this topic, which I found really fascinating and applicable across the board. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at how people think, then really it applies to everything that we do, including choosing beers, right? So, that's why I got into this, and I sort of coalesced my thoughts into this book. I think, therefore, I'm wrong, because so much of how we think about thinking is really misleading. I think we understand that a whole lot better now than we did, say, 10 years ago, partly because of social media, partly because of the books that have come out, like Kahneman's book, and partly because society now very much is focused around this issue of how people use things to manipulate, to persuade, which of course is, I know, the essence of your show. I did write a book. Interestingly enough, I wrote a book. I was quite well into my career as a therapist. And I realized, you know what? Nobody has either given me a course or told me about a course on communication. And that's insane. Here I am as a therapist, and I'm trying to convince people to change their behavior or do this. And no one's ever addressed that issue with me.
Sure.
And so I went and did a lot of the research, and of course, Cialdini, who's obviously on top of your list, and did some of my own research and wrote a book called Power Talk: The Art of Effective Communication, which is a sort of soulmate to, I think, therefore I'm wrong. So I've just been fascinated by this, and having got into the writing, I just think it's important that people understand how this works in today's world.
Yeah.
That's before we get into the book, I'm curious, because a lot of, people that listen here, they're always having to come up with new ideas. As an author who's written multiple books, and ghostwritten you're what, 40, 50 books now, it sounds like.
Yeah.
How do you keep coming out with new ideas, especially in such a tight niche?
For me, coming up with ideas is not actually problematic. That's just the way that I am. It's interesting. A few years ago, I'd always thought that I had developed this sort of critical thinking, sort of somewhat cynical, but positively cynical view. And I came across, I was clearing out some stuff from my mother's house, and I came across a piece I'd written like when I was 7 years old. And there it was. The style was right there. Amazing.
Wow.
Really amazing. It sort of shocked me. But, that's just kind of my mindset. So coming up with ideas is not a problem for me. Obviously, shaping them into appropriate forms and books and all of that is something else. But for me, that's not really an issue. And when I'm working with other people, of course, they bring their own ideas.
Right.
And I like to work with them so that we work together as a team to shape and shape them in the best way possible. So I'm sorry, that's not a great answer to you, but I can't say that I have, here's the 5 steps for coming up with a creative idea about,
Yeah. That's perfect. I was just curious. You're kind of the second person today I kind of was listening to different things who's written just a ton of books. So I was just wondering, I think though, I found that they kind of breed themselves. Like you get the idea in the midst of another something else you're doing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Momentum in action for sure. And research that you're doing and all that stuff. I think
if you have an inquiring mind and you ask yourself, a couple of questions, it doesn't take long before you can see different spin on something. Could be fictional. I mean,
right.
Nonfiction. I mean, all my books have been nonfiction. I got a couple of fictional ones on the back burner. Yeah, so for me, has not been a problem. In fact, it might be to some extent, it might be the opposite problem.
Yeah.
When I first started out really in writing about 25 years ago, I had a really good mentor who, first of all said, Howard, you're writing about too many different things. I don't know what your niche is. And that was actually very legitimate. And then she also said something that 25 years ago was relevant, but even more so today. Howard, you don't have to tell me everything you know about this subject in a book. And that is so true. It's certainly true today where a book, for a lot of people, is a business card where you're trying to get them to interact with you more. So you don't want to tell them everything.
Sure.
You want to get them engaged. And then if they want, coaching or whatever, obviously that's the business model today.
Yeah, that's a great point because we get very proud of our own writing and our own thinking, which is part of what we'll talk about. That's a good segue right there, right? So we kind of get proud of our own thinking. So tell us, the title of the book is I Think, Therefore I'm Wrong. I've been through the first sections or so of it. I'll also mention that it's already come up a few times, but I saw it in the book too. Howard, like you've got a little bit of a sarcastic bent to you. It comes across so smooth because you're English.
Yeah.
So if our listeners are not paying attention, it may go right past them.
It was really interesting. I was doing a podcast a couple years ago, and there was a guy on who was some sort of medium spiritual thing, and before the show, he said, tell me, exactly the hour of your birth and when, the date of your birth. So I told him that. Yeah, right. I didn't know this guy from Adam, and I'm sure he didn't do research on me. He came back and he said, okay, Howard, often you're the smartest guy in the room, but you're sarcastic. You can be cynical, but in a positive way. The guy nailed it. I'd never heard anyone describe me like that. How he did it, I don't know. But yes, there is a little sarcasm there. Humor, I think, is so important. I think I've got a quote in the book from a British raconteur who was one of my favorites when I was growing up, Peter Ustinov, who said, humor is just a funny way of being serious. And it really is. It makes you laugh, but underneath it, there's a point that is serious. And absolutely. I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. So true. I mean, the best comics, that's what they do.
Absolutely. Although we
All right.
kind of entering in an age where it's kind of tough to know what you can say and what you
Yeah.
can't, right?
So yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk about this age we're in and thinking and all these things. We'll let
Well,
you jump off
sure.
of why you wrote the book and why you titled it what you did. We'll kind of jump off there.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to write the book because I think people don't know enough about thinking. They don't know about the thinking process. And as I say, it affects everything that you do, everything that we do. It affects every aspect of life. And I think we grow up, and maybe that's changed. I'm a little older than you guys. We grow up with the notion that human beings are rational and logical, and there's a certainty to things and all of that. And that simply, certainly in today's age, but even then, is wrong. It's simply wrong.
Yeah.
There's a severe limitation to rationality and logic. Those work in what we call bounded systems. And a bounded system is where all the rules are known. So that would be like playing a game. Let's say we play Monopoly, all right? Everyone knows all the rules, the cards, what have you. You can predict, you can be as logical as you like because everything in that system is known. There's no unknown. But life isn't like that.
No.
Right? Life is
That's
not
for
like
sure.
that. And so, we go around with this feeling and pretend someone, I made a good rational decision. The fact is, in most situations, we know only a small amount of what there is to know. So there's a limitation there. We can't be totally rational because we don't know. We don't know. We have to recognize that. And you can say, well, within the limits of my knowledge, this seems, and that's fine, but you still have to recognize there are limits of knowledge, and you are still making some, what we'll call for the moment, intuitive processes, right? You're still thinking, well, that's actually much more important than this. And therefore, I'm going to weight my decision based on that. Well, that's an election you've made.
Reminds me of who wrote that book? What was the book? Predictably Irrational.
Oh yeah,
years back, where it's more or less from a consumer behavioral standpoint, but it's fascinating because you're exactly right. We are not. If you read through that book and from what I've read through yours, we're not logical creatures at all. We're very irrational. We'd like to think we are, but we talk time and time again. We think we make buying decisions based on logic and based on our our research and all of our data that we've accumulated, but that's never the case at the end of it.
Another book that comes to mind is A Random Walk Down Wall Street. And how that's a classic.
Yeah. And so when any of these things come up, we have to understand that there's an element of rationality and logic involved, but we can't be completely rational. We can't be logical. And that's not really how we work. We work on sort of emotional comfort and control. That's what that's what any organism wants, survival. And so that's what we work on. And so that what we're drawn to are things that reassure us or rationalize our decisions or justify the thoughts that we have. And of course, so many of those biases come into play to help us justify those thoughts.
Sure.
Big one being confirmation bias. Look for everything that confirms what you think and ignore stuff that doesn't, or trash it, or what have you.
We're seeing a lot of it feels like we're seeing more of that than ever before, but is that true, or is that historically we've always done that?
Well, I think with social media and the sort of massive increase in communication and sort of a big picture media, everyone's out there.
Yeah,
that has simply magnified this problem.
I think would you agree that we can just find the information to support our biases so much faster than ever before?
Absolutely. And of course that's what happens with curated stuff. You're going to be shown stuff that people know you want to hear, not stuff you don't want to hear. So it just gets bigger and bigger. Then we have social proof coming in. Oh, there's a guy in Australia who agrees with me. I must be right.
Yes.
Right. And so then that social proof comes in, and so social media offers many ways of rationalizing and feeling comfortable in finding your tribe, as it were. And that has definitely accentuated this issue. And that's partly, and it's also because then we become more divisive. Because then people become more certain about it, don't realize they're rationalizing. Then the other side is just an extreme idiot. And before long, we're very polarized.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, a big problem.
Yeah. So one thing I love the way you started the book was you gave some just very clear examples that, if you start with the wrong premise, then you could be as logical as you want.
Right.
And you think it would make sense that you got to the right quote, right conclusion, but you started with the wrong purpose. There was a character on one of the, I think, medical dramas or something who said you need to check your premise. If all else fails, check your premise. Or I can't remember if it was a movie or a show, but that came to mind while I was reading. But so tell us about kind of those 3 steps that are in the first couple chapters of the book. What was it? Premise. And I don't remember the other 2 off the top of my head.
Well, binary thinking, of course, and comes in. And context, of course, but you start with a premise, and the example I use in the book is if I think the light bulb is, or the lamp is telling me to do terrible things, it's perfectly logical for me to unplug it. Okay,
right.
I'm being terribly logical. Okay, but it's where you start with that premise and how reliable and sensible it is. And so you start with a premise, and of course how you frame that. And I'm sure you guys talk a lot about the framing effect when you're talking about media or anything. How something is framed is going to influence your perception of it.
Sure.
And part of that is you don't get a second chance to make a first impression in the sense that if I frame something to you, and one example in the book I used was a real example of somebody had written a story about a guy who broke up with his girlfriend, and 12 years later she committed suicide, as if somehow those 2 things are linked. Okay.
Right.
I have framed
12 years later, right?
12 years later, I have framed this in a way. I put 2 ideas together, and the default setting of the brain is to do that. I've got these 2 ideas. How are they connected? Right? How are they connected? And
looking for patterns.
Yeah, we're looking for patterns. And if you just present those 2 things, then people are going to look for patterns.
Right.
and that is that's dangerous, and that's where we get into all the sort of conspiracy type stuff too.
Sure.
There's a good online site, and it's called something like Wacky Correlations and stuff like that, where it presents these sort of bizarre correlations. Like over the last 10 years, there's been a very high correlation between the price of cheese and people who've suffocated in bed. And stuff like that. I mean, that's exactly right. If you're presented with 2 things, it's framed that way, your brain is automatically going to do that.
Yeah.
And you need to be aware that it's going to do that. Otherwise, you're going to end up thinking dumb things. But that actually is a lot of how the media works today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
There's no, I don't think there's any independent media anymore. I think it's all based on a preconceived notion, and it's pretty much catered to one side or the other. It's hard to find anything that's completely independent and simply reporting these days. It's all confirming biases on either side.
Yeah. Have you guys come across Matt Tiapi's book, Hate Inc.? If you haven't, I would really recommend it. Hate Inc. He was a Rolling Stone journalist, and he looks at the evolution of this divisive media over the last 3 or 4 decades and really explains well how it works. Of course, now today is you got to get somebody fired up. Well, how do you get somebody fired up in a story? Well, somebody is the helpless victim and the other person is the Hitler-esque monster. Oh my God, binary thinking, divisiveness, that's how we do it. And he shows how the media have developed that deliberately, mostly because of sales and profit, but how they have done that over the last 30 years. And actually, if you think about it, it would be extremely difficult, even if you were trying to be as unbiased as possible. You would say, well, we've just interviewed this person who saw this crime going on, but we didn't interview 50 other people, and we don't really know this guy's background. We don't know whether he's telling us the truth. And you'd have to have all these disclaimers that would be ridiculous. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and say, hey, this is just one person's. This is what we have at the moment. It's an evolving story. We're going to find out more as time goes on.
Sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the pressure of that, at least from the media, is that it's now a 24-hour news cycle. So you don't have, they're pressured to get content out, period.
Yep.
So you don't have time to do a 6-month investigative journalist type thing anymore. Those days are pretty much dead.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. And that certainly has contributed to it, or the other, or both, and they've contributed to each other. But that's exactly what happens. We're not really this story will be dead in 3 days. We got to maximize it now. Well, in 3 days, it might be a totally different story. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand, specifically about science. And as a scientist myself, I'm not defending science isn't the most perfect thing, and it's not free of bias at all. In fact, I have a section in the book about the issues with science. But the thing about science is this is what we know today based on limited available evidence. One of the things in science is, well, we need to replicate those so we can understand them more. The problem in science is not that many people want to keep replicating other people's stuff. They want to develop their own niche and stuff like that. So that doesn't happen. But it's an evolving process that when you've discovered one thing, it opens up more questions. It doesn't solve the answer. And so when people who don't understand that, and I understand why they wouldn't, say, well, these scientists can't, they can't make up their mind. Masks do work, they don't work, this does work, this doesn't. Why don't they, And that, my equivalent to that would be like asking Jonathan, what's the score in the Packers game? And he would say, oh, Steve, Packers winning 10-0. And then I ask him 10 minutes later, what's the score? And he says, oh, it's 21-0. I say, make up your mind, Jonathan. What is it? 10-0 or 21-0?
That's right.
It changes. And especially in a complex world, it changes so rapidly. So we have the binary thinking, the notion that any two ideas that we hear about or come across somehow are causally, not just related, but causally related, that one causes the other. And there's a lot of no evidence for that a lot of the time. And then we have these biases that then enable us to justify anything we want.
Sure.
What do you think it is that in our learning and our thinking that keeps us from accepting new information, especially from the other side? The quote other side. I'm just going to.
Yeah, no, that's an extremely good question. First of all, a bit like communication, and I'm sure you've done many great episodes on communication and persuasion. Is there a course on communication in school? Heck, no, there isn't. None.
Not in lower education for sure.
And maybe higher education. I'm actually doing a course on communication. I'm writing a course on communication for professionals because sometimes it's very problematic. Is there a course on thinking? Now, the Victorian education model that we have, and I saw that you had interviewed J.W. Wilson, whom I also know. That Victorian model is, we teach it through science. Why do you have to teach it through science? Yeah. Really? Why?
Sure.
Why do you have to do that? Why not, make my book a compulsory reading? No, okay, but you understand what I'm saying. Why?
No, you're absolutely right. Logic used to be taught in, years ago.
You talk about that. Yeah, you talked about that in your book, Howard. The founding, 2,500 years ago in the Greek, and those guys.
Yeah,
yeah.
That was part of your education discipline is just understanding logic, right? I mean, which is no longer taught today.
No.
Yeah.
And so, there's a failing definitely at an educational level about teaching about fundamental life skills, really. And I think communication is definitely one of them. And I think thinking is one of them too.
So I'm curious, you've mentioned the word of communication a few times. How would you define communication?
Oh, that's a very good question. Communication is an interaction, I guess, between one or more people. It does not have to be, of course, it does not have to be the spoken word, right? Clearly doesn't have to be spoken. We interpret people's, nonverbal, their gestures, all of that stuff. Although, interestingly enough, this might give me a forum to get on one of my hobby horses about communication. Communication is not 93% nonverbal. Okay. You hear this all the time, right? Probably. Right. Communication is 93% nonverbal. I think I put it in this book or maybe the Power Talk book. Now, that comes from a study by a guy called Albert Morabian, who did this in the 1960. And his study was he stood up, said a couple of words that were totally asynchronous to what he was saying. Okay. So he might say, I'm not angry. And then say, well, do you believe what he said or what is verbal, the nonverbal? Well, of course you believe the nonverbal, right? But that doesn't mean that 93% of all communication is nonverbal, right? So bit of a hobby horse of mine. So thank you for giving me a platform there. But we're communicating all the time.
So I guess then to take that a step further, because you've mentioned like communication is not taught, communication should be taught. So what then is effective communication? It seems like that's really what you're kind of at.
So effective communication is, it varies depending on the circumstance and the context in which you are talking about. But let me give you an example that came from my own understanding of this. When you're trying to, as a therapist, you're trying to get people to change behavior. In a way, the worst thing you can do is be logical and rational. Okay. So this is a good story of mine. So if somebody comes in and eventually I work this out. Somebody comes in and they say, well, Dr. Rankin, I want to quit smoking. What I would say originally when I was a bit naive, is, of course you want to look at all the downside of smoking. No. Now I would say, why the hell do you want to quit? Because why I think he should quit's got nothing to do with it.
Absolutely.
And everyone else has told him the same thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to get his defenses up by saying, put him on the demand. No, why do you want to quit? Mm-hmm. And this reminds me of a story that goes back to some of my earlier days where there was a client in the addiction research unit in London where I was working. I was working on the alcohol side, but there was a quit smoking clinic too. And this guy was inveterate. He could not quit. He kept coming back. Nobody could get him to quit.
Yeah.
Now, I happen to know that he was a very avid socialist. Mm-hmm. And this was a time when the Labour Party did formed some governments in the. He was an avid socialist and very anti-capitalist. And just by chance, one day I saw him in the store, and in those days you could get cigarettes out of a machine, putting money in and getting them out, putting them in and getting them out. And I looked at him and said, "Oh boy, Joe, those capitalist tobacco companies have really got you by that. You know what?" He got so mad he quit. Okay?
Wow.
Nothing to do with smoking.
Sure.
Yes.
To do with what drives him, right?
His why. Yeah.
His why, not mine. That's
Yep.
irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of the time in professional health communication, that's not the way it goes. It's, oh, this is what you've got. This is what you must do. Really?
Yeah.
How are people going to do that? And
Yeah,
when we
and
know, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, the only way to find that out is to ask questions.
Yep.
Or if you know the person you've observed, which is a form of question, I guess, is to kind of, because you're asking yourself, what do they believe? What do they
Exactly.
like, want?
And what's the hook in them? Not your hook, their hook.
Right.
And I'm sure you've come across the work of Milt Erickson, very famous, very successful, one of my heroes, psychiatrist of the late 20th century. And he tells this great story about this because he was the master of not challenging people so their defenses go up and then they ignore him. And a woman came to see him who was frigid. And as he talked to her, he learned that her mother had told her that sex was evil, dirty, terrible. Her mother had died when this girl was 11 years old. And so now she held this wonderful model of her mother in her head. So I can't, if I say, the obvious thing seems to be, your mother was wrong. She must have had something wrong with her. What are you talking about? Forget it. No way is that going to get across, right?
Yeah.
What he said was, you know what? Your mom was absolutely right. Sex is evil, dirty when you're 11 years old. Unfortunately, she didn't live long enough to give you the 15-year-old message and the 20-year-old message and the 25. And if she were, I think this is what she would have said. Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just brilliant.
Yeah, he I've got one of his hypnotherapy scripts books, Milton Erickson. It's and the subtlety of it is absolutely amazing. Like the wisdom and subtlety is just incredible for sure.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite books on that is Jay Haley's Uncommon Therapy. I'm sure you can still get it, but that's where that story comes from. And when you learn that, then you start thinking about quite differently. If you're in the business of trying to get people to change, you think totally differently. You go from this logical model, why isn't this person listening to me? It's obvious they need to do this, to how do I fashion this message that is going to resonate with them, that they're going to accept?
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically what you learn after 40, 50 years of marriage is what you're saying. Hopefully.
Hopefully. Not even that long. Right. Maybe 5,
Maybe.
How do I say this so that I can get what I want out of this?
Well, no, I think that's true. I think that it's one of the things that happens is men and women very often will see things. You take any two people, but certainly different genders, they're going to see things differently. And it doesn't mean they're both stupid or they're both wrong or one's right and one's wrong. It doesn't mean that at all. One time I did a lot of couples counseling. And that's why I'm bald, I think. But anyway, did a lot of couples counseling. And one time this couple was arguing, no, it's this, no, it's that. And I got a tissue box. And I said, you, sir, say this is a box. And you, madam, think these are tissues. And you could argue the rest of your life about whether it's tissues or a box. Okay?
Yep.
What are we going to do? Right? What are we going to do? Because you get stuck and people have different frames of reference. They do.
Yeah.
My wife is a wonderful visual designer, amazing skills visually. I'm not there. Okay. So one time we were looking at new curtains, I think it was, for a bedroom. She's holding them up. Well, which do you like better? Which do you like better? And I'm thinking, come on, tell me, which do you like
You
better?
were asking how much, right?
No, not at that point. She said, "Look, come on." I said, "Look, you know about this." I don't. She said, and then I said, "Okay, stop. Before I tell you that, who's going to win the American League West?" And she looked at me with a blank expression. I said, "Duh." Okay, no frame of reference.
Right.
Yeah. And unfortunately, those sorts of things can be resolved by understanding that and recognizing that, rather than just batting heads and just getting more extreme and going downhill, really. Because that's one of the things that happens in marital conflict when we're talking about when we're talking about biases. If you're in an argument with somebody, at that moment, you're not going to feel very warm and loving, right? You're going to feel oppositional. What your brain is going to start doing is start thinking of all the things that, this person, has done like this in the past, and before long, you can spiral down, through these biases, the availability bias, the confirmation bias, all of that. Before long, somebody who, 2 hours ago you were very close to is now, a horrible enemy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the system, when you get to the divorce court, doesn't help that at all. It just doesn't.
No.
Let's talk real quick about, you got a chapter, I don't know if you coined this phrase, but offendology.
Offendology, yeah. I coined it.
Yes.
We seem to be in an age of offendology. So, so tell us a little bit about that, which
basically leads to what we all talk about is cancel culture, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So,
and so there is a little bit of a hypocrisy in people. In Plato pointed this out about I forget one of the other. Maybe in Aristotle, about one of the other Greek philosophers, that if you have a relativist view, and your relativist view is anyone can say anything, and it's all relative. There's nothing, Plato said, well, that got to be false, because if I can say anything, I can say relativism doesn't exist, and it doesn't. Okay, so then we get into all of the sort of individual things. This is my reality, not yours. I don't like the phrase "my reality." I understand what it means, but a reality is something that's sort of agreed on. And so this is my perception. Yeah, absolutely. Reality, I think we can go a little wrong there. And then this whole thing, really fueled, I think, by the media and what we were talking about before, is victimhood.
Yeah.
Now, I got a phrase, it might be a book, but it's a chapter in a book that I'm writing, The Tyranny of Victimhood. Because, hey, horrible things happen to people. Yeah. I am not in any way denying that. Man, I've had to help people who've been there. I understand that. But taking a helpless mindset is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Life is about adaptation. It's about dealing with the challenge. And it's so easy because life's not fair.
No.
Right? The justice system is a legal system, not a justice system. It's not fair. I mean, and everyone that I've dealt with a few felons in the course of my career, it wasn't my fault, the judge or the lawyer or this guy or somebody. No one takes responsibility for no one takes, hey, I did it. I made a mistake. If I didn't want these things to happen, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, it's been exaggerated, what have you. I'm going to own up to it and move on and make the best of it that I can. rather than all these people, I'm so mad at them because,
Right.
they took a picture of me while I was robbing the store. They have no right to take a picture of me.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, that reminds that, excuse me, that. And then you talked about the kind of the hero and the villain thing. There's a diagram I remember from coaching or, some psychology stuff about the victim triangle or that whole, victim hero. And we're always, if we're not careful, we can end up on one of those points of the triangle at the mercy of the other two,
No question about it. And it's hard. I think the default setting when you get into these situations is to do that, is to protect yourself, say, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do that. I didn't do it like that. People are lying, all of which may be true, actually. But, take responsibility for what you have done, accept nobody's perfect, and move on and find meaning in it. Find meaning.
Yeah. So I was talking to somebody last week, and it's interesting because you mentioned that Aristotle or Plato or whoever back in the day was kind of having this argument about what do we call it?
Relativism.
Relativism. I was trying relativity. That's not right, but I guess it kind of is. And he was saying, somebody I was talking to, I haven't checked the facts on this yet, but he was like, when just before a lot of civilizations fall, they get into this trap where everybody's in this, everything's okay, male, female, right, wrong, like all this stuff. It gets very fluid. Have you found that to be true in your research, or?
Yeah, and one of the reasons why the future of mankind is included in the title of the book is that towards the end of the book there is a chapter exactly about that, about the collapse of societies and the variables that seem to be associated with the collapse of societies, and yes. That seems to be the case. If you look back at history, there were all sorts of variables, interestingly, things like actually climate change that changed agriculture, which obviously changed economies, which was a big deal, and huge differentials between the haves and the have-nots, again, which probably resonates today as well. And again, the sort of breakdown of a consensus of what things are, should be, etc. That has been the precursor of several societies collapsing.
So if we look at that, though, I mean, because I think about that a lot. I think about there's always these trends, even, climate change, things like this, I think we get a little arrogant and think that our time is unique, It's like our history books, our thinking, our thing is unique, and nobody's ever experienced this before. But the further you go back in history, the more it seems to just be on repeat. So I kind of look at that too, though, and I'm curious if you came to this conclusion in the future of mankind. Like mankind survived all those fallen civilizations.
Right.
Like even if you look at something more recent, like I used to be in the financial newsletter space. I wrote copy for financial newsletters, and one of the big themes is always like losing currency reserve status in the U.S. That's been the theme for the last 30 years over here. It's a big thing. Well, in England, you lost reserve currency status. What was that, post World War II or between? I can't remember exactly when it was, but and I tell people, it's like, well, England lost it, and they still have tea at, in the afternoons. They still go to Starbucks today. Like, it's probably sucks for a little while, but overall, it all kind of evens out. But I'm curious your take on this. Like, is this cycle bigger or different, or is it just because we're in it, or what?
And that's honestly an impossible question, I think, to answer. But the question is important, and it's a question that we do need to think about: is how does this evolve over time? How does it? We don't know. I don't know whether the availability of technology, for example, is an advantage or a disadvantage seriously in a sort of situation like that.
Because that is the key difference, I think, this time, probably Of course, you probably could have said that about the printing press too. So
Yeah. Right.
Well, yes, that's true. And they probably thought they were really smart now they had, printing press and glass. Yeah, and that's the problem is we can't see ourselves objectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can't see ourselves objectively. Maybe it'll take an alien to come down and give us their perspectives on, human beings and human race. But we can't. We only look through it our lens, and that's one of the things that is important to understand. The brain, the human brain, is a magnificent computer, or whatever analogy you want to use, but it's still limited.
Yeah.
It's still limited. We were talking before about binary thinking, and one of the reasons why we have binary thinking is the brain really cannot focus on two things at the same time, let alone more. Multitasking is really task switching. You're here and then you switch back, but the brain can't do that. And if it can't do that, then you're sort of stuck a bit with this sort of binary view of things.
Sure.
It makes it so much easier to say, let's just divide it. It's either this or it's that. Well, it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But do we have the capacity to really see through that? Perhaps technology will help us do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So what can people take away from this? We're coming up on an hour here. So I wanted to you wrote this book. I know you wanted to get the information out, but what can people do and what can they take away with this? I don't want to leave them oh, this is it. Good luck.
No. Yeah. Yeah. You're on your own.
Yeah.
Figure this out.
No, buy the book and
of course, buy the book. Yes.
Yeah. Buy the book.
Buying books solves all problems.
Of course.
And you know how I know that is because every author that's ever been on this show has said so.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. That must be right.
It's one of those correlations.
Yeah, there you go. Must be right if everyone says it, right? Yeah.
Before we get into that, though, I want to cover what Sean just asked, because I do want to see what the ultimately what the what the answer is to all of this. But I notice a lot of what we're talking about. There's a big correlation with fear. You talk about that in your book. And a lot of decisions are they're based on fear. We act out of fear as human beings. The avoidance of fear is one of the most powerful motivators. And Sean and I talk about this a lot on our show from a persuasion standpoint. It's used in marketing all the time. Research, it consistently shows that there's a disproportionate motivation to avoid negative consequences, right, regardless of how, remote they might be, but we think about whether it's climate change, whether it's the financial crisis, whether it's, anything that we're faced that the media can perpetuate and exacerbate and amplify, to make their point, or to move us in a certain direction, they'll use it. And I think it's so powerful that we are, I see it in the, we talk about the news and the media today. It doesn't matter what side it's on. We're fear driven based on one side or the other. And I think that's, we're, as human beings, we're risk averse. It's used so much to persuade us. And so it's, I think it's something important to mention. You talk about in the book that people are more, they're much more likely to grab the opportunity not to lose $100 than they are to gain $100. That tells us where we are as a human, as a society, though. I'm avoidance driven. I don't want to lose that I have already gained.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We are risk averse. We've worked that out. It's about 2.5 to 1. In other words, the opportunity has to be almost 3 times better than the loss for somebody to say, "Oh, okay, well, I'll do that." And but yes, we are risk averse. It is.
And that's why marketers use it all the time on us, because it's more effective than the opportunity for an opportunity to gain anything,
Right.
you're much more effective at talking about what you might lose than what you might gain.
Absolutely. While stocks last.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, we could have a whole nother session on neuromarketing, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
it is. It's driven by fear and anger
Yeah.
too. Also, fear and anger
Mhm.
is really what drives it. And that's sad.
Yeah.
I think it's
Well,
sad.
And a part of that, which we've mentioned before, but fear shuts down the very parts of the brain that you need to be more logical and rational in your thinking.
Yep. That's right.
Yep. Yeah. And certainly anger does that too. And then you are not, you're using your limbic system and your amygdala, not your frontal cortex.
Right.
And I believe that's really, really important for people to understand. I think it is important to practice and teach behaviors that actually strengthen the frontal cortex and give people some skill at managing emotion.
Sure.
At managing emotion. Because
And if you had to say the number one thing that was skill, because you mentioned there's skills you can learn, what would that be?
the simplest skill, in terms of a pragmatic skill to manage emotion, is breathing. Is learning how to breathe. I'd combine it with mindfulness and meditation. But breathing is one thing that actually does control that sympathetic nervous system and actually does tone it down. So, and that's something that I've used personally, in the few occasions I've got into real, scary situations. That's what I do, and it works because it actually does control the emotion. But beyond, and so I think that's important, but I think that is a really critical skill. Emotions are important. I'm not saying ignore emotions. I'm saying don't let them control you.
Right.
Don't let them control you. They're there for a reason. Look at them. Listen. What are they trying to say to you? Because they are, anger comes on the perception you're being treated unfairly. Okay, I'm angry. Why? Am I really being treated unfairly? What's up about that? The problem is that these things get so uncomfortable that people want to switch the emotion off and not address the problem. It's like your fire alarm's going off. Oh, shut the fire alarm. Okay, well, why did it go? Oh, I don't know. I just shut it off. Right? So it's the same thing. We got to learn how to manage that. I do think that is part of human evolution, of managing that, because we are manipulated by that all the time.
And there's certainly not those classes taught in school, at least not the schools I went to.
No.
And something so simple that, is absolutely like breathing, that is available to everyone, regardless of any status of any kind. Like, I mean, it's such a simple, like, maybe I can't go work out at the, with a personal trainer and all that to get my fitness or whatever, but I can breathe. Like I carry that with me everywhere.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's really important.
Yeah.
And I do like the mindfulness meditation aspect of it, where you do switch off your editor and your usual processor and stop and allow yourself just to be in a space where you're not trying to judge anything or anything. You're just experiencing it.
Sure.
And when you can do that, that's very powerful. Very powerful, because then when you get these emotions, you can distance yourself a bit from them. You can say, yeah, I can see I'm angry, but that's okay. I'm not going to blow my top. I'm not going to go, I'm not going to let it control me. I need to think about this, but I'm going to calm down first. That emotional control, we know how to do it. I do think the things we've been talking about, simple things, just not taught.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can then use the emotion to say, okay, like you said, all right, this came up for a reason. Maybe should I be trusting this guy who made me angry? Maybe I shouldn't. Or maybe it's something I'm carrying around, from whatever. But you can't process that until you've calmed down.
Right.
It's just impossible to process.
Right.
Because you can't access that part of the brain.
Exactly. And while those are going, here come the biases in your head, right? That are
Yeah.
winding you up and justifying everything and just making it worse. You know, when you see it in other people and you say, "Oh my God, what's wrong with that guy?" But we're sort of all like that to varying degrees.
Sure.
And so that's key. And I just wish that these things would be better taught, more available. They are fundamental life skills, and they would be better than anything else taught in school. Seriously, history, you know, geography, science, whatever.
Certainly better than math. Again, I'm just going to say that.
Yeah. So, you know, seriously, it is. Those things can come later. If you want.
Yeah, how to think is that's like the foundation. That's fundamental. I mean, that should be the very foundation of everything else.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be done indirectly through, you know, STEM classes and science. You can do it directly. And again, now this is a little bit more problematic, but using the things we were talking about earlier, you know, Ericksonian approach and engaging people, ideally, it should be taught from the student's perspective.
Sure.
When I was in practice, I used to ask all the clients that I had, whether they were, you know, first graders or kids in college, what your favorite subject is. And very often I got the same answer. It's not a subject. It's not recess. It's not sports. What do you think they said?
Lunch?
Nope, not lunch.
That was just me.
Not beer either. No.
Well, I thought maybe lunch because of the social aspect of lunch.
Yes, and you're getting a little bit. You're on the right track there.
Let's see. We eliminated lunch and PE. Those were my favorites.
I know. Well, I know for me, when I went to school, like when I got to school early and just kind of, I don't know if they still do this, but we would kind of walk the halls and like you kind of meet everybody in the morning. That was a time that was kind of cool.
Break. It was break in between.
Yeah, and you're onto something there, social aspect. Now, don't feel bad. I was at a think tank with some very cool guys from the Yale School of Education. I asked them, they didn't get the answer right either. In fact, you got closer than they did. The answer that I got typically was the class taught by my favorite teacher. Which is sort of along your lines of social. I made a connection. Yeah, I like it when I was made a connection. Yeah. Duh.
That goes back to what, you know, we had, as you mentioned, we had, was it J.W. Wilson?
Yeah.
He came on and he talked about that, you know, just like the teachers we most remember are the ones that, you know, when we learned or they taught us, they related to things that we were interested in. Yeah. And those are the people that we remember. Those are the subjects that we remember most and that we love most.
That's right. That's exactly.
Or they were just cool teachers.
Yeah.
And treated you as a human, basically.
Well, you know, in other words, there was a connection between and that connection engaged you, you know, and that engaged you with them. And that made their teaching much more available to you.
Sure.
You know, once I had a parent say, "Oh, yeah, my kid's no good at school. All he's interested in is, you know, basketball." And I said to him, "You know what? I could teach him everything he needs to know using basketball metaphors, right?
Sure.
Geography, history, maths. I mean, you name it.
Geometry,
anything you could, right?" And so now, obviously, in a group setting, that becomes a little problematic. But that doesn't mean this whole approach of meeting people where they're at. And finding what motivates them and fires them up neurologically, you know, then they're going to learn. It's not that difficult, you know.
Yeah. And there's a book I read a while ago. I can't remember the name of it now, but you know, they talked about just the different things you can do physically with students. Like if you have them do PE before their most challenging class, they're great. Their grades go up because there's more oxygen in the brain and all these things.
Yeah, John Rady's book from the 90s about that. Spark.
That's it.
Yeah. And, that's a great story too. The school in the school district in Illinois, who started doing that. They started introducing exercise for kids. And what was interesting here, it wasn't a PE class. It could have been, but it was anything that they enjoyed. So it could be dancing, skipping rope, or whatever, but it was movement.
Yeah.
Right.
And, the interesting thing was that they then entered the school district in this international contest for math and science, in which typically the U.S. comes in about 12th behind, a lot of the Asian countries.
Sure.
They entered as a school district and they came in number 1 in science and equal number 1, I think, or just behind Japan in math.
Yeah.
Okay, doing that. Again, that's pardon the pun, a no-brainer. We know that exercise sends those chemicals into your brain that gets you much more receptive.
Sure.
Don't sit in the classroom for 5 hours. Good Lord. How boring.
Or come straight home and do 5 hours of homework, which is kind of the current trend.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We have these such simple physical solutions in a lot of cases that we get too in our heads and not enough, not incorporating the body and the heart and all these other pieces that we're made with.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's interesting too. I don't think this is a tangent. John Leaf is an interesting doctor. He's written a book called The Secret Language of Cells. That isn't about prisons. It's about what goes on inside our bodies. And it just was mind-blowing, even for a guy like me. Mind-blowing that all the stuff that is going on, that we don't see, that is shaping how we feel, how we think. I mean, it was just incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing. We just don't understand that.
Yeah, there's some incredible stuff there's a documentary, I think, on both Netflix and Amazon Prime about gut bacteria and how much it influences your thinking and brain, depending and what you crave. So if you have more bacteria that thrives on sugar, you're going to think one way, and if you have bacteria that thrives on vegetables, you're going to have a different type of thinking. And I mean, it's just fascinating how simple some of this stuff is that we're learning. There we go. So
yeah, we know it. And, because we know some of it. So, the good thing is at least we're investigating it and we're finding out more. Hopefully we'll get it right.
So what do you want the listeners to kind of take away? Obviously you want them to get the book, which we highly recommend, because there's a lot of stuff that we didn't even touch.
Right.
Obviously you can't go through 18 chapters in an hour podcast.
Right.
But what do you want people to know about the book and kind of take away?
I think what I want them to do is to think about their thinking, right? To realize there are so many other factors that go into decision making and thinking that you need to be aware of them. And you can find out about these things from my book and other books like it. Now, one of the problems is that obviously there are things where, you don't have to do a deep dive into it. Like, where am I going to go for dinner? We don't need to say, well, wait a minute, it's a Wednesday. Who's on those? What's on them? We don't need to do that. Yeah. And so a lot of the time our decisions are just quick. Right. That's okay. But the problem is it then trains us to make any decision like that. Sure. We have to realize the key decisions in our lives and important decisions can't be made like that. That's just random, right? And there is a balance between intuition and rationality. In fact, a colleague of mine just brought out that book called Intuitive Rationality, which looks at, we have rationality, but we also have all of these other factors, intuition, biases, the environment, all these heuristics that then also influence what we do. Sure. And to at least understand that process so that on the key decisions in your life, you're not going to be led down the wrong road, or at least understand how you need to think about it and maybe get some help in doing that if that's too difficult for you.
Awesome. So where can people find more about you and your book?
The book is on Amazon. I do actually have a site called I think therefore I'm wrong.com. I also, I'm on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel under Dr. Howard Rankin. Put some fun stuff up there. And my website is drhowardjrankin.com. People can reach me through that, and I'd be happy to interact with anyone who's got comments or an interest in this.
All right, man. There's a lot to unpack there, and good stuff. So I highly recommend the book. You sent us a PDF version of it that we kind of scanned through, and I'm about halfway through it, actually reading it. So yeah, there's some good points, and if you like history, there's good history, especially in the early parts, and then all the way through aliens at the end. So
yeah,
cover the gamut.
What's the real quick? What's the other book again, Howard? Is it Power Talk? Is the one on communication?
Yeah, the one on communication is called Power Talk: The Art of Effective Communication. As I say, I wrote that about 20 years ago, and I just brought out last year a second edition. Updated. A lot of one of those chapters is really dedicated to Mark Tappy's Hate Inc. book, because I just think it was so relevant to that whole concept of persuasion. So that's on Amazon as well.
Yeah, we got a whole host of books here to check out. So thanks for all the recommendations.
Wow,
Keep us in business.
Yeah, thanks for the beer recommendations. That's
Yeah, we'll post a link on our show page, Howard, and for the books, and also the link to the website where our listeners can find those. Very appreciative. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
We would love to invite you back on again in the near future, maybe to talk a little more about spend some time on communication, and it's a skill set we can all work on, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in the meantime, I will try a few beers too, so I can be a little more.
There you go. That's right. You need to get up to speed with our world.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
All right. Well, listen, we're gonna send you to the green room for just about a minute or so, and then we're gonna bring you back up. We want to talk to you on our post show, discuss with you a little bit. But in the meantime, we're going to let you spend some time in the green room. Sean and I are going to wrap up, but thanks again.
My pleasure, really.
Yep, you bet. All right. Well, that is good stuff. And
that was
again,
good stuff.
Yeah, I love these deep dives that we take from time to time, Sean.
Yeah. I feel like we could just, this would have been a good show, like literally before the show existed, at Casual Pint, just over beers and talking into the early morning hours.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So that would have been.
I used to think about, old C.S. Lewis and his Inklings, sitting around a pub talking.
Yeah.
This would be, this was probably never a topic of discussion.
I'm sure everything was open for
everything was
C.S. Lewis, including good beers and good cigars. So
I know good beers,
and bourbons and scotches. And
yes, absolutely. So, I know good beers.
By the way, the website that we were talking about early on was Spurious Correlations.
Spurious Correlations. Okay.
So yeah, it's got all kinds of charts on it, and he's now got a book. It's actually Tyler Vigen, VIGEN.com.
Okay.
So if you're just looking for like good stuff to talk about, that's totally out of the blue at a cocktail party or wherever. Yeah, there's some crazy stuff on here. Like, I think this is one of the most famous ones is number of people who drowned by falling into a pool correlates with films Nicolas Cage appeared in. I remember hearing that one somewhere before. So,
oh wow, number of films Nicolas Cage has appeared in. Wow.
Yeah, by year. So like he has these bar charts or not bar charts, but these line charts for every correlation, and
interesting.
They lay on top of each other, so it's pretty funny. So yeah, Spurious Correlations. If you do a Google search, you'll find it for that. So,
speaking of Nicolas Cage, I do not recommend. Actually, caught myself watching one of his most recent films, Pig, and not impressed. he is he's
Not
fallen
gonna
off
be
the wagon, so to speak, in terms of his Hollywood credentials.
not quite as bankable as he used to be, I guess.
No, he is not. So
Yeah. So
but anyway, with that said, great show. Again, the book is, I think, Therefore I Am Wrong, A Guide to Bias, Political Correctness, Fake News, and the Future of Mankind. We'll be posting some links to not only the website, but also to the links to the book, also the book Power Talk as well. And we certainly appreciate Howard joining us on the show. Sean, it's been fun. You can find us on all of your podcast platforms, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, you name it, iTunes. And Sean, with that said, we'll see you guys next week.
see ya.
All right.